as I mentioned earlier, is also very important in trying to build synergy within the policies of different ministries, departments, and agencies. Because you see that when we talk about identification is an issue, but the way you look at it from Minister of Interior lens might be different from that of the Minister of Finance lens, as well as the private sector lens. So it's important you create a synergy to see how we can work together to find a trade-off on different policies and also how to improve on the policy to be in line with the current needs of the society, because policies are not supposed to be rigid. They change as the need arise. And also creating awareness on the importance of remittances is quite important, not only to public institutions, but to the private sector as well as the individuals in hard-rich areas. I always say that Gambia is special, and it's special in the sense that the number of people that use the formal sector is quite low compared to the rest of the world. It's below average. And the challenge we have is both on the public and the private sector. I see that the number of products that are available for Gambians to support or to motivate them go formal are quite narrow. We have 95% of our population are Muslim and 12 commercial banks. But we have only one bank in the Gambia that offers Sharia banking. So it's quite difficult to motivate people to come in the formal sector. So I think the private sector also need to improve on the number of products that are available for the needs of the population. Financial literacy is quite important as well, and we need to also make sure government understand the importance of financial literacy and in promoting financial inclusion. We have the financial inclusion strategy in the Gambia, but when you come to the implementation, do we also develop implementation framework on how we implement this financial literacy strategy? I think we need to engage the public sector more. We need to communicate more. We need to strengthen the networks that we've already established to kind of support the reform, especially ease of doing business reform in the Gambia, and also to champion some of this initiative by working with all the stakeholders to ensure we improve on digitalization and financial literacy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ndumbe. And I think you touched on a few issues: the need for broader dialogue across all stakeholders, the need for financial service providers to meet consumers where they are, because she raised an issue around religion, and it's something that many financial service providers miss, and even in contexts where the majority population belong to a particular religion. She also touched on the importance of having choice in terms of accessing financial services. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn to James to touch on informality from a sending perspective. And James, your input, I would like to frame it drawing from today's discussions. One of the submissions in one of the panels, they said the biggest driver of informality they see is people actually losing their job. So it means that formality or informality in a way is tied to an economic activity. And you've done a lot of work with merchants, small merchants, trying to onboard those heavy cash users into digital channels. Can you please speak to MasterCard's philosophy around moving consumers both from broader economic activity perspective, because that's one of the key drivers of informality in South Africa when you're looking at how people end up sending money over the border?
Thanks. Thanks, Lennon. So, South Africa is one of the rare countries, as we've spoken about, that doesn't really have has mobile money. It's never really launched there. It attempted to launch, but it's never taken off. And there's various factors for that. As a South African, we're highly bankerized. I think 92% is the figures. But there's a huge community outside of that is the ones that we talk about in a remittance perspective that are not served in the formal banking sector, and it is very difficult for them to get into the sector. And thankfully there have been a lot of players that have come in, many of them have spoken today, into the sector to help and obviously get involved and be able for these people to send money formally back home, but there's still the ability of them to actually hold and have a digital store of value versus actual cash. And this is still very difficult in South Africa, and it also equates to the costs associated, because a lot of the remittances, I think 96% are still paid for by cash, which adds a significant fee into the actual fee of the amount getting sent, because there's a cash-in cost to this. Thankfully, there's a lot of fintechs that are coming in and are starting to create this digital store of value for clients. We as MasterCard are obviously trying to get involved in there. There's regulation where we aren't where we would like to be, but to the point where someone can have a digital perspective and then be able to go and from that point be able to use it and be able to be involved in the formal community or formal remittance spot. But I guess the big issue is just the gap at the moment between acceptance and these pay endpoints, and with things like tap on glass, there's acceptance is I think it's doubled for us over the last year, but the point is those consumers still don't have that store of value to actually use that, and it's still cash, and there's still a lot of work to be done in the informal aspect with all the fintechs that are starting to bridge this gap.
Thank you, James. I think you hit the nail on the head here, because just to give context, South Africa, in typical small businesses, you can find a POS machine, but the moment you produce your card for small value transactions, they'll tell you that it's that they won't accept your card payment. And this is something that providers really need to understand, that the consumer segment that we're trying to serve is very cost sensitive, and it's very rational because they've been doing this for a long time. And I think he touched on the issue around acceptance for newer technologies. Indeed, technology has the capacity to bridge some of the gaps that we're seeing in the market, but the responsibility is on remittance service providers, government, to provide education in terms of the benefits that ensue from adopting those technologies. Just to conclude the discussion that we just had now, in the interest of time, the problem that we are dealing with of informality is simply linked to all the discussions that we are having today. What we're actually seeing is debanking, because we think that consumers choose to use an informal product. They are forced to do so by different factors that we're exploring today. How do we solve the problem of de-risking? How do we advocate for simplified due diligence? How do we educate consumers in terms of financial literacy? How do we deliver better value proposition? All those factors combined lead to exclusion of people from the formal financial system. So I think the onus is on us to play a role. I think one of the things that were highlighted today is that this problem that we're trying to solve involve multiple stakeholders. There are public sector related problems, literacy, which is also tied to education systems and how they function and how they're playing out in terms of outcomes in the financial sector. So I think these are some of the complexities that we're dealing with in terms of navigating this challenge of informality. And by no means, I did not expect that by the end of this panel, we were going to come up with a solution that solves the problem, but it was my hope that we were informed by the different perspectives that were presented today. And I thank you for all your time. Thanks. And after this session, there's going to be a cocktail. I think we finish right on time, so there's going to be a cocktail hosted by Twins. Yeah, if anyone has any burning questions, I'm going to open up the floor before we exit for cocktails. Prof.
My name is Jibril Fall, and I run the MSDG project in Gambia, and we work with Ndumbe, and we work with many partners. As part of the IFAD grant to Q Money, which is one of the two, we have the only two mobile money license holders in the Gambia, Q Money and AfriMoney, and we're supporting some of the research with Q Money that allowed us to expand the other work we've been doing on remittances and on informal remittances. In our yet unpublished report, we think that in 2017, formal remittances, we know that that was 226 million. We think that informal remittances in 2017 was 300 million, which is in line with the estimates that it's about 150% of formal. But the data we've gathered now, we think Gambia's informal remittances have gone significantly down. Because now that we've got data before COVID and after COVID, we have intelligence for retrospective analysis. During COVID, most of the channels for informal remittances were shut down. So that means all of them, or almost all of them, were forced into formal. So post-COVID, that allows us to have a retrospective guesstimate of the volume of informal. And in Gambia, we've seen a huge jump in 2020 before COVID and 2021 during COVID. So the informal is coming in. Then in 2022, we saw a decrease in formal remittances, meaning some have stuck with informal, but some have returned to informal. We think that there's only two main forms of informal, that reduction. One of them, it's very likely it can never be eradicated, and perhaps one shouldn't even want to eradicate them, and that is cash couriers. And more people post-COVID were traveling back to come to Gambia, so they're carrying cash. In Gambia's diaspora, one particular country, Spain, has a big diaspora of over 30,000. Many of those people, given their socioeconomic background, are more likely to use informal than formal. In fact, they would save cash, give it to one person, pay that person's transport for that person to go and deliver cash. I interviewed them. The Spanish authorities have stopped them at the airport for carrying 100,000 euros and have investigated them and confirmed it's their money and let them go. It's their money, and I've interviewed them. So that bit of cash courier, it's unlikely, unless the formal sector have something extremely attractive to compete that. The other bit which the formal sector can do is the unregistered operators. So there are a number of Gambians in the diaspora who operate as unregistered money transfer businesses. What we found in our study is almost all of them are linked to major importers, exporters. So they are not independent traders. They are not doing it to challenge Q Money or Western Union. They are doing it to collect forex for traders. And that, perhaps the banks and others can do something about it, but the cash couriers would be a difficult one. We think that in 2022, informal remittances could have been as low as 25% of formal. And Ndumbe supervised one of the biggest primary research on remittances in Gambia. It's just about to conclude. Nothing's been analyzed. All over 1,200 receivers were interviewed, and this question on informality is buried in that. And together with IFAD in the coming months, we'll be working together and publish more data on Gambia. Thank you.
Just a small clarification. There's two other projects that Prime Africa has in the Gambia. One with MFS Africa, and it's actually dedicating resources for rural agents, training rural agents, and doing financial literacy, not selling a product, in rural areas, and particularly through women organizations. So that's going very, very well. So I invite you to also look at that. And the SEMFRI project that is actually done a lot of work is finalizing now on customer due diligence and simplified KYC. Yeah, so just to make the note. Small detail, AfroMoney is executing that. That's grant on behalf of MFS. So yes, we are participating with the women's groups in the rural communities, doing on the ground, feet on the streets, working with women's groups. That's part of the trust aspect as well, right? So you brought up a good point earlier around financial literacy and how can a private sector really participate in that. And to be honest, we can't. We have stakeholders we answer to. I cannot explain to them why I'm spending 3 hours teaching people about budgeting and how to deal with your money, but I can partner with folks who have that as a core value and principle. And so we've worked with several women's groups that is their premise, and we simply latch on and provide AfroMoney or mobile money as a mechanism to have financial services and literacy. So to kind of answer your question from the time before. But anyway, if you need more information, we should write a case study on that, because that should go out minimum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just adding just a little bit on that. Currently, we are also partnering with one credit union in the Gambia to train 1,000 remittance receivers immediately after the survey throughout the Gambia on financial literacy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to turn back to something that Prof has touched on in terms of the scale that informal operators are having. This is quite concerning because we are doing a lot of work trying to support the Gambian as an ecosystem in terms of improved regulatory environment. And this is concerning because they are working at a scale of formal financial service providers. And there is a lot of talk about a fair playing ground. And I think off the record, Prof, we're going to follow up in terms of how can we balance between cases where informal is serving more needs and at the same time undermining the overall business case for other players who are regulated. Because as you've just seen, the licensing requirements that are upcoming are not light. And if we have operators moving 200,000, 300,000 euros, that becomes a risk to the formal financial sector. So it's not necessarily a good thing that they're doing that. It's seeing how we can balance those dimensions, the need for access and the need to cultivate the broader ecosystem so that it works for everyone. So I would be happy to follow up with you, Prof.
Thanks, Leonard. Yeah, just to corroborate what Prof just highlighted, a colleague of mine did a study. I actually supported in conducting this study for Java, which is the regional anti-money laundering body for West Africa, and we got similar results. And what we found out was that we have a lot of businesses that are engaged in these informal remittances. And if you check the customer base of these informal remittance service providers, it's mostly Gambians who had embarked on this backway journey, that is traveling to Europe through the Atlantic Ocean. So if you look at the situation of these Gambian migrants, a lot of them do not have proper papers to send money using the conventional financial system. So for them, the only choice they have is to use these illegal remittance service providers. But what we realize from the Gambia side is that most of these people, most of these payout centers are actually engaged in second-hand good businesses. They obtain second-hand goods from Europe and sell them to people in the Gambia. So in essence, the way the scheme works is that the backway boys, let me call them that way, who make money in Europe and do not have a way of sending it through the formal system, give it to agents in Italy or in Spain. And these agents work directly with the second-hand goods dealers in the Gambia. So instead of sending the euros that they collect in Italy or in Spain to Gambia, they purchase goods in those countries and ship them to Gambia. So in essence, they have two businesses. It's like a two-in-one business. So I think in order to solve this issue is to find a way of regularizing the status of those people in the European countries, because without that, there's no way that they can send to GT Bank or to AfriMoney or to Q-Money. They do not have the papers to send the money. So I think if we can find a way of getting those people included in the financial system, I think we can easily convince them to send money through the channels that we want. That is what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think all the submissions today speak to the complexities that I've just pointed out. And I would not like to hold you any further. I hope you had interesting discussions. As I said, from here we are heading to the cocktail that was financed by Tunes. It seems that their rail worked this time, so we heard that the payment is through, so we can go other side now.